Welcome back, everybody. This is another episode of the Exodus Project. I'm your host, Steve Eisenhower, and today I am joined with a very special guest from Israel, Rabbi Alex Hool. Um, if you'd like to introduce yourself, mention your books, which are linked in the description of this video. We're going to talk a little bit about secular and Jewish chronology and perhaps the discrepancies and how we could reconcile these things. So, Rabbi Hool, all yours.
Yes, I live in Bnei Brak, Israel. I've written a couple of books on dating, chronology. The first book I wrote was focusing on the major discrepancy between Jewish history and secular chronology with regard to the Second Temple period, according to Jewish history, classical Jewish sources. The length of the Second Temple was 420 years, whereas according to the secular sources, it was 589 years. There's basically a gap of 168 years between the two, a discrepancy of 168 years between the two. And I wrote a book about that to try and reconcile the discrepancy, really try and understand what really happened, how two chronologies became so diametrically opposed to each other. That was the first book. And then the second book was actually really led on from one thing to the other, called the Pharaoh book. Basically, I looked into again, another discrepancy between secular chronology and classical Jewish history with regard to the Exodus and basically the whole of Egyptian history. This time is a bigger discrepancy. Basically, according to secular chronologies, the Egyptian dynasties goes back 1,000 years earlier than dictated by Jewish history, and of course that involves identifying who the Pharaoh of the Exodus was and the various pharaohs in the Bible, and that's what we sort of went in to investigate the problems and to bring evidence to what appears to be the solution and the correct chronology of the Egyptian dynasties. Yeah, so those were the two history books. Then I did a bit about challenge of finding Mount Sinai, identification of where Mount Sinai is.
I just watched I watched you give a little lecture on that recently, which was really, really good. On YouTube not too long ago. I just watched that.
Right, that's right. Yeah, I gave a few years ago. In London. Yeah, I gave a sort of a short resume of what of the basic evidence to the proposal what we have. In fact, when I actually originally found the site, I was directed by the verses and the various sources in the rabbinic tradition, and I actually made a slight mistake, but I got close enough to see that on my map there was actually a mountain which is still called today Mount Horeb. Arabic is Mount is Jebel, and it's called Jebel Harab, which is really Horeb, which is what we know from the Bible, from the Torah. Another name for Har Sinai was Har Horeb. So this excited me tremendously, and I found more and more information which directed precisely to this mountain.
Yeah, I watched that. I was blown away. I thought that was like that oral transmission of the name to me was staggering evidence. That was that was Arabic, right? The Arabic locals still call it Hariv. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite amazing how the fact that names seem to stick for thousands of years. I actually went on to write a book about the desert encampments, going through all the different encampments of the Israelites through the 40 years sojourn in the wilderness. And again, I found sites which had the name in the right place, which fitted in with the names actually written in the Bible. So again and again, I found that names have stuck
Yeah.
literally for thousands of years.
Yeah. So we just the Jewish people just finished up with the holiday of Purim, right? So we understand that that occurred in Shushan, Persia. Um, and there was a story. It's now been debunked, but that there was a tablet found in Israel with the inscription of Darius the Great. So I know that some of your work is focused, and that book you spoke about is focused on the lost years of the Second Temple period, as you mentioned. So what could we really? Where's the reconciliation there? Because it seems like the Persian timeline, according to scholars and the Greek chronologies and all this, is very, very off and very convoluted and almost hard to decipher, right? So how do we reconcile this? Like where do we put whom? You know, where how can we balance this out to make it a bit easier to understand and not be staring in the face of what seems to be a massive problem when the secular scholarship wants to say, oh, the Bible is completely false. Look at the chronology we have.
Right. Well, it's actually quite straightforward. Let's first sort of present the actual problem. Everyone agrees that Darius, that this was the tablet referred to as Darius the Great, was the king, the monarch who instructed the reconstruction of the Second Temple, because it is written in the Bible. As Darius, it actually is referred to as Darius. This is Darius. Everyone is universally accepted. This is Darius the Great, who reigned after Cambyses. Now, so the Second Temple was built according to what the Bible says in the second year of Darius the Great. That everyone agrees. Everyone also agrees basically that the Greek era began roughly the 312 BCE. That's when what Minyan Story started. It was the whole world started counting according to the Greek era, 312 BC. So that's also basically accepted. So the question is, between Darius and the Greek era, how many years were there?
Hmm.
So the way the secular chronology works is that following Darius, there was another 7 Persian kings until Darius the last, and Darius the last was defeated. Darius the third was defeated by Alexander the Great just before 312 BC.
Right. Battle of Granicus.
Right. This is that's the secular chronology. The indication from the Bible is that Alexander the Great came on the scene just at the time of Darius the Great.
Hmm.
So therefore, basically, the discrepancy of the 168 years is really the whole of the latter Persian era. The reason why there are more years, according to secular chronology, because they have a whole set of 7 kings, 7 Persian kings, who basically ruled over the Persian Empire, which controlled most of the known world. And that was basically is really 155 years, another 13 years of the Greek era. But the main problem is the extended era of the latter Persian kings. So it was initially understood that in order to be able to vindicate what is the Bible and Jewish chronology, one would need to deny the existence of these 7 Persian kings. Now, this is a fallacy, a dangerous fallacy, because the evidence that these 7 Persian kings existed and existed after Darius is extremely powerful, and it's quite really indisputable that there were 7 Persian kings. There are thousands of documents, literally thousands of cuneiform documents from the various kings and the various king years which they reigned, and we can following through these documents, through the inscriptions, we can actually build a chronology from Darius all the way down to Darius the last. So these kings existed. But I discovered that the existence of these kings was actually not in contradiction to Jewish chronology, classical Jewish sources, the indication of the Bible that Alexander the Great defeated Darius the First. What that means is as follows. What it means is that Alexander the Great defeated Darius the First. Legend has it that he was actually a son-in-law of Darius the Great. So after he defeated Darius the Great, what happened to the Persian Empire? Well, the Persian Empire was taken over on the whole by the Greeks. However, evidently, 3 years after the defeat of Darius, Alexander granted to Xerxes, who was the son of Darius, the Persia. He gave back Persia to Darius, and therefore he allowed the kingdom of Persia. Now, obviously, it was now very muchly diminished now. They weren't ruling the whole world. They were ruling only in Persia, but they continued to rule in Persia until the next 155 years, alongside the Greek Empire. So what we're doing is, in other words, we're not taking away the 155 years of Persian history. We're just actually slotting it in alongside the Greek era. And that way, we actually contract the whole of the Second Temple to 420 years. Now, after realizing that this was a real possibility, I went to look for evidence, and it's quite incredible the amount of evidence there is which actually directs us to this conclusion. I mean, let's talk about documentation in Persia. According to the secular view of history, the Persians ruled Persia and the whole world throughout the Persian era, followed by the Greek era, when the Greeks had already defeated the Persians, and the Greeks now ruled the whole world, and they were ruling in Persia. So we would expect that there should be inscriptions, there should be documentations, there should be tablets from the Greek era in Persia. We should have mention of the Greek kings, Greek temples in Persia, but we don't find anything. Although we find in Babylon, yes, and all other places around, we have clear evidence of the Greek era, but in Persia, there seems to be almost nothing at all. Now so this fits in perfectly with the idea that the Persians were there. That most of the Greek era, the Greeks weren't there in Persia. They were in Babylon, but they weren't in Persia because the Persians were still there. There was a whole Persian Empire
because Alexander, he set up Babylonia as his basically Mesopotamian capital, right? When he took over, he crowned Babylon as his crown jewel city. So it would make sense that, yeah, sure, take Persia. That's fine.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And after he died very shortly after. After he defeated Darius, he died very shortly after, and he split up his empire into four kingdoms. And it would be very understandable that he would leave the Persian Persia to the Persians, to the Persian. There's actually an even a document, a tablet which records a Persian king coming into a temple, which is where they were evidently mourning the death of Alexander the Great. Now, this is quite impossible according to the secular version of history because there were no more Persian kings. Alexander the Great defeated Darius the Last. Yet we've got this king, and it appears to be Xerxes. The name fits that he comes and addresses the people in the temple, and he refers to the mourning of Alexander the Great. So he was, yes, he was alive at the time of Alexander the Great. There's another tablet, the Uric King List. The Uric King List is a king list of all the Babylonian kings on one side, followed on the next side by the Persian kings with the Greek kings. Now, the top of the verse side, the list reads as follows: Nidin Bel, Darius, and Alexander. Now, we all know that before Darius the Last, there was no king called Nidin Bel. I think it was Arses, but there was no such king Nidin Bel before Darius the Last. Now, according to the view of the Greek portrayal of history, Alexander the Great defeated Darius the Last. So who's this Nidin Bel? But that does happen to be well known in the Besetan inscription. It's a rock face in Iran, where Darius the Great actually describes how he came to power, and he said there was a series of rebellions throughout the empire, and one of the rebels who actually became king, and we've actually got documentation tablets dated to his reign, was someone called Nidin Bel. So we've got here indication that the Nidin Bel, who was before, we know is before Darius the First, and he appears on this Uric King List, and followed by Darius and followed by Alexander, which would clearly imply that Alexander the Great defeated Darius the Great, and not the last 155 years later.
Yeah. Wow. So changing gears a little bit from, the Second Temple period, you also have a book about, Egyptian dating and how that kind of has discrepancies also. And I think with a name of my channel like the Exodus Project, it only is fitting that we talk about Egypt a little bit. So it seems to be kind of a similar motif that the dating of kings and so on and so forth between the upper and lower kingdoms and so on. That's kind of where the discrepancies come in. Am I right? Am I right in saying that, or?
Yes. To be honest, we can really sum it up in a nutshell. That after our investigations, it would seem that basically there were, if we take the first 18 dynasties, well, in fact, from the 18th dynasty all the way to the construction of the Second Temple, actually Darius was, I believe he was actually part of the 27th dynasty of Egypt. He was actually a ruler in Egypt. So yeah, so we're going from the 18th to the 27th dynasty. In fact, there's almost
and sorry not to cut you off, but this Darius the Great, this Darius, this is in fact the son of Ahasuerus and Esther, yes?
Yes, oh yes, definitely.
Okay.
He was the son of Ahasuerus. In the Behistan inscription, he claims he was a young man. He was 20 years old, he claims. And he also claims to be a distant relation of Cambyses. He wasn't a son. Cambyses was the previous king. But scholars have reason to doubt his lineage. And according to the rabbinic sources, he was actually he was a son of Ahasuerus, and he would have only been 6 years old at the time of the rebellions, and he came to power, and he wouldn't be able to secure the kingdom by himself. And he actually refers to in the inscription of 6 associates which helped him,
Hmm.
and
Wow.
um, they must have been doing most of the work. And
Yeah,
he
yeah.
had gone a few years to his age in order to make it look like he was the main. Yeah, but according to everything fits in that Darius was he was the son of Achashverosh. Cambyses was the Achashverosh of the Purim story.
Hmm.
Uh, he be, that the reason, although we only have 8 years attributed to Cambyses, but he was actually started as a joint ruler with Cyrus in Babylon, and
Hmm.
he start from and then he became king in Egypt. Mehodu ad Kush is actually Hodu is right next to Kush, and Kush is in Africa, and that's where he actually became king. And at least when you if we take the years of when he became king in Hodu and Kush all the way to the end of Cambyses' reign, it actually ties in very neatly with the Bible, the 13 years of
Wow.
Achashverosh. Yeah, so
Incredible.
Darius
Incredible.
was the son of Achashverosh. So he was from the 27th dynasty. So basically, between the 18th and the 27th dynasty, there's actually almost perfect matching between the secular chronology and Jewish chronology. It's actually very strong between the secular chronology between the 18th dynasty and the 27th dynasty, and everything fits in with the Bible. Um, the main problem is between the first and the 18th dynasty, and in a nutshell, basically what we discovered was that the first 6 dynasties led up to the 18th dynasty.
Hmm.
So and the 7th to the 17th were actually overlapped between the 4th to the 6th.
Hmm.
So, but the Exodus, what happened? The Exodus actually took place during the 18th dynasty and the end of the 6th dynasty, because the end of the 6th dynasty was actually at the same time as the beginning of the 18th dynasty.
Gotcha.
And and if you go back 6 dynasties, you'll go back to the foundations of Egypt.
Yeah.
But the dynasties between 7 to 17 were actually overlap between the 4th to the 6th dynasty.
Right.
Uh,
And for people who might not like, for the my viewers who might not know exactly what you mean when you're saying there's overlap, there's Memphis and then there's Thebes, right? So, and this is where this is
yeah,
overlapping, right? Is you have the kings in Upper Egypt and the kings in Lower Egypt, and that's how you can have overlapping dynasties, right?
yes, of course, absolutely. I mean, no, people don't realize how vast Egypt is.
Mhm.
And there's easily room for overlapping empires or kingdoms. The Northern Kingdom, it was actually known throughout the Egyptian history that the Northern Kingdom, Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt, at various stages, there were different kings. At the same time, Upper Egypt is actually southern Egypt,
Yeah, right.
because of the high elevation.
Confusing.
Yeah, it's a bit
Yeah.
confusing. Um, and Lower Egypt is the northern part, and there were kings, and yes, and that's really part and parcel of it, is that these overlaps were to do with the upper Egypt and Lower Egypt,
Mhm.
where the kings were
Right.
ruling consecutively. Yeah,
Yeah. And you get that from the also because the Nile flowing northward because that's why the south is
yeah.
upper. Yeah, yeah.
That's
Water
right.
flows
Water
down.
goes downwards. It
Yep.
flows downwards. So that's
Yeah.
why it's flowing towards the Mediterranean. That's right.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's actually how I remember where Upper Egypt is, from
Right,
the
right.
Nile,
Yeah.
about the Nile. Yes.
Yeah. I'm kind of the same way. It's like upper is the opposite of where I think it's supposed to be. So
Right, right, right.
yeah, I mean, absolutely brilliant. If you were to ask, I think just your normal, run of the mill person looking into this type of stuff, they probably would have no idea that there even was a lower and upper kingdom and that there was overlapping kings and that Egypt really was, I mean, it wasn't a unified kingdom for most of its history, right? So
Right.
uh it's so easy to have discrepancies. And if you could take just a minute, their calendar system kind of makes this tough too because they worked on three different types of calendars if I'm remembering correctly. It's almost like they had like a religious calendar and a political calendar, so on and so forth. So if you have any information on that, just let us know how that works in with this too.
Right. Well, so actually, the backbone of Egyptian chronology is based on what is known as Sothic dating. It's very solid, but it's only a basic backbone of the Egyptian chronology. It's based on sightings of the Sirius star, the Cyrus star, whatever it's called, which is connected with a particular time in the solar year. And the Egyptian calendar was basically a very simple calendar, was 365 days. It was 12 months of 30 days with an extra 5 days at the end. It became I keep on forgetting the actual name of it, but they added on an extra 5 days at the end of the year to make it 365. Now, the solar year is actually 365 and a quarter days.
Mm-hmm.
So what that means is that basically any date in the Egyptian calendar will fall behind every 4 years, 1 day in the seasonal year. Now, because the sightings of the Sirius star is actually fixed to the seasonal year, so various stages in the history at the time where the site was actually dictated to have occurred in the Egyptian calendar, we can use that to see how far the Egyptian calendar has fallen back in the interim period of the Egyptian kingdoms, and we can build up from a few of these Sothic dates the basic chronology of the dynasties in Egypt,
Right.
and using these Sothic datings, basically we can get a relative chronology of the whole of Egyptian dynastic era. Now, what has happened is that this is a very solid relative chronology, but it doesn't give us absolute dates, because we know all we can work out from this Sothic dating is how many years between, let's say, the 12th dynasty and the 18th dynasty.
Mm-hmm.
But when did the 12th dynasty actually take place? When did the 18th dynasty take place? That the Sothic dates don't tell us. However,
Okay.
there are some astronomical dates, lunar dates, which can fix the various king and regnal years of the various dynasties to absolute dates in the distant past. Now, these have been seen to not fit together in the general understanding, the general chronology of Egyptian history. We have actually applied the Jewish way of understanding, following actually the conclusions of the first book, which is basically, if you think about it, by saying that Darius was actually conquered by Alexander the Great, and everyone knows when Alexander the Great was, around about 312 BCE. So we're actually bringing Darius forward in time to 312 BCE instead
Right.
of 155 years. Now, because Darius was part of the 27th dynasty, what we're actually doing is we're bringing the whole of the dynastic era 155 years forward.
Wow.
Now, this happens to be, we found that the astronomical dating can actually harmonize with the Sothic dating, based on the Egyptian papyri, which you have from the latter Persian era, and all the way back 1,000 years to the 12th dynasty astronomical dates, which also fit in. So we got sort of three areas of dating. We've got Egyptian papyri from the latter Persian eras, which give us absolute dates of the Persian era, which was followed the 27th dynasty. We have also astronomical lunar dates from the 12th dynasty, which give us an absolute date for the 12th dynasty, and we have our Sothic dates, which tell us how many years it should between the 12th dynasty and the 18th dynasty and various dynasties in between,
Right.
and they all fit in perfect harmony.
Incredible.
Yeah, so this is a very strong basis to the chronology which we are actually presenting that needs to be corrected in line perfectly with the Bible and the authentic sources.
Yeah. And this actually kind of rectifies the Exodus dating also in
Yes,
part, wouldn't it? So because
yes. I mean,
I think the archaeological ideologies is that if they were to concede an Exodus, they would have to say it's like 2 centuries prior to when Jewish chronology in the Bible would say it is. But if you can make up 155 years, well, that moves it right into place, right?
exactly. You're just bringing everything down in the same way we're bringing Darius towards us. So we're bringing the beginning of the 18th dynasty and the end of the 6th dynasty at 155 years forward or so. And that takes us to 312 BCE. No, sorry, not 312. The date for the Exodus is
13,
1308. Was it 30 or
yes,
13?
something like that.
Something like 308 BCE, and that's just in line with the Jewish dating precisely. In fact, what's quite amazing is there's actually evidence, first-hand evidence of the plague of boils at the time of the 18th dynasty.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, basically the astronomical dates and the Sothic dating fixes the beginning of the 18th dynasty to the time of the Exodus, at the time of Tutmosis the Third. Now, we happen to have the mummies of Tutmosis III. Not only Tutmosis III, we have the mummy of his it was not biological father, Tutmosis II, the previous king,
Mm-hmm.
and and a queen who was his aunt, and a nanny. We have these mummies of these early 18th dynasty kings, and they have discovered that they are covered from head to toe in boils. The boils which
Wow.
exactly would you expect to be on them because they lived at the time of the Exodus. Um, and it's quite amazing to just actually see looking at the boils which
Wow.
visited these the ancient Egyptians at this time.
They don't by chance have any archaeological evidence of anything else that would match plagues at the time, do they?
Well, there's the papyrus, which seems to recount very vividly various descriptions which are can be attributed to the 10 plagues.
Wow.
Yeah, the locust, the blood in the river, the death of the firstborn, the destruction, the darkness, the fire in the sky and the actual Exodus itself. It seems to be a vivid documentary of the time of the Exodus. And according to the corrected chronology, the sixth dynasty was actually coincided with the beginning of the 18th dynasty, and this papyrus is actually dated to the end of the sixth dynasty. So it also again fits in precisely with the Exodus story.
Right.
Um,
And I think my last question on the matter, do you think the Hyksos have anything to do with that, or they are something completely different?
I think they have a crucial role. Uh, they have a crucial role in the whole Exodus saga because I think the Pharaoh of the Exodus, you might get a shock. He wasn't a native Egyptian. He was the Hyksos.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
uh, and I think he was a Canaanite. He was actually an Edomite. He was he was an Edomite, and he actually they came to power roughly at the time. They didn't come to power. They came to be living with at this very similar stage of Joseph. When Joseph came in down
Hmm.
to Egypt, there was an influx of Canaanites into the very area Goshen, where Joseph was,
Yeah.
and these were an influx of Canaanites, and they eventually came to the throne, um, and the sixth dynasty, I believe the sixth dynasty and the fifth dynasty were part of the Hyksos uh, dominion. In fact, ancient historians refer to the Exodus taking place at the time when the Hyksos were driven out of Egypt.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
yeah, so,
Because
so
that's a
yeah,
common theory that some archaeologists say, well, perhaps the Hyksos are the children of Israel. I never really subscribed to such a belief, but it does seem kind of um I want to say coincidental, but maybe that's a word to use, that these things are occurring around the same time, right? And everyone agrees that the Hyksos are in fact a Semitic people, so we have these overlapping occurrences here. So it's and with this
yeah.
with this corrected chronology, it seems to really mesh it all together. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's an inscription referring to one of the queen at the time, the 18th dynasty, referring to um, a wandering people who lived at the same time as the Hyksos. So we've got here the Hyksos, who they were the sixth dynasty rulers, the rulers over the persecution of the Jewish people. At the same time, we have a reference to a separate people, the wandering people who also left Egypt at this time. So yes, that fits perfectly with the Exodus saga. That there was the Hyksos. They were ruling over Egypt, and they were driven out at the very same time when the wandering people, the Israelites, were actually left Egypt.
Yeah.
And the actual Exodus enabled the southern rulers of Egypt to be able to finally overthrow what
Hmm.
was left
Right.
of the Hyksos kings.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Rabbi Hool, I really appreciate you coming on, speaking with me, talking about your work and these updated chronologies and how you've been able to really using the Torah and other Jewish literature, really find a way to reconcile what for years has been, like a such a fight, right? Um, so it's to me it's something incredible. I love history, so this is like right up my alley. uh, but yeah, open invitation. Anytime you want to come on and talk history, teach a little bit of history, you are always welcome. That door is always open. Um, any final remarks you have for this episode, though? Anything else you'd like to cover?
Thank you. I'd just like to thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. It was a real pleasure. Yes, I also I love history. I love the challenges, and I love looking for the truth.
Right.
And today, in this day and age, we have enough authentic evidence to be able to gel together the true chronology of history. 150 years ago, everybody believed in the Bible. In the last 100 years, the academic community have claimed that they have found discrepancies which cannot be reconciled with the Bible and have caused serious dismissals of the narrative, the Bible narrative. But at the same time, we have now new evidence coming in at the whole time, which demonstrates precisely the dictates. And it's extremely powerful. It's astronomical evidence, it's cuneiform evidence,
Yeah.
it's very, very wide. And something like your podcast like this can present it to the world that,
Yeah.
yes, go bring it to the arena, the academic arena, study the evidence,
Yeah.
and you'll see for yourself. It's all open for all. The evidence is rock solid.
Hmm.
There's nothing to be scared about. We can look at the challenges, and we can demonstrate the truth and the validity of the Bible.
Yeah.
And you are helping us do that. And I thank you so much.
Yes, of course. And I appreciate your work. It's as you said, it's rock solid, and let's tell the world, man, right? So,
Yeah.
Everybody, Rabbi Alex Hool. Um, if you could just name off your books, they're going to be linked in the description. If you just want to let everyone know the titles.
Okay, if well, I have to try and remember them. Well, the challenge of Jewish, I try and go in order. The challenge of Jewish history, then came Pharaoh, and then the searching for Sinai, then the desert encampments, and the latest book is the 6 days of creation.
Awesome.
Eden, dinosaurs, and the missing billions. There we talk about the
Wow.
age of the universe, how it fits in with the 5,000 years dictated by roughly five. We're coming up to the end of the 6,000th year, actually. How it can be reconciled with the literal narrative of the Bible,
Wow.
um, and it can be. You can be rest assured it can be.
Well, that sounds like a second episode, if you ask me, Rabbi. But yeah, those books linked in the description. Everyone pick up a copy of each one. I'm sure the rabbi here would be more than thankful if you did, more than grateful.
Oh
Um,
yes.
but everybody, until next time, I'm Steve Eisenhower. This was the Exodus Project, Rabbi Alex Hool, and we'll catch you next time, guys.
Bye bye.